In a dramatic court showdown, the Zambian government and the family of Edgar Lungu clashed over the late president's burial. Tensions are high, accusations are flying, and what's playing out in court right now could reshape Zambia's political legacy forever. Tension boils over as the Zambian government and the Lungu family battle it out in court over the burial of former President Edgar Chagwa Lungu. This courtroom clash reveals why the Lungu family is resisting state burial involvement, what the government is demanding, the deeper political and emotional stakes, what Zambians in South Africa and back home are saying. This isn't just a family matter, it's a political and national legacy on trial. Watch the full report from InspirAfrica official, Zambia's most fearless political voice. 1. Why the Lungu family is resisting state burial involvement. The Lungu family's resistance to state involvement in the burial of former President Edgar Lungu stems from a combination of personal, cultural, and political factors. At its core, this resistance reflects a deep mistrust of the Zambian government, led by President Hakainde Hichilema, and a desire to maintain control over a deeply personal family matter. Let's unpack the reasons behind their stance. Personal and emotional considerations. The death of a loved one, particularly a prominent figure like Edgar Lungu, is an intensely personal event for any family. For the Lungu family, the decision to bury the former president in South Africa, where he passed away, appears to be rooted in emotional and practical considerations. According to posts on X, the family sought to retain control over the funeral arrangements, particularly the location and nature of the burial, rather than relinquishing this responsibility to the Zambian state. This suggests a desire to honor Lungu's memory in a manner they deemed appropriate, possibly reflecting his personal wishes or the family's preferences for a private, dignified process. Grief can amplify sensitivities, and the Lungu family may perceive state involvement as an intrusion into their private mourning. Funerals in many African cultures, including Zambia's, are sacred events where family decisions hold significant weight. The family's insistence on managing the arrangements themselves could be an effort to preserve this cultural norm, ensuring that the burial aligns with their values and Lungu's legacy as they see it. Political mistrust and historical context. The political backdrop is critical to understanding the family's resistance. Edgar Lungu, who served as Zambia's president from 2015 to 2021, led the Patriotic Front (PF), a party that lost power to Hichilema's United Party for National Development (UPND) in the 2021 elections. The transition was marked by significant political tension, with Lungu and his supporters alleging harassment and marginalization by the UPND government. This history of animosity likely fuels the family's reluctance to allow the state to take charge of the funeral. The Lungu family may fear that a state-led burial could be politicized, turning a personal loss into a public spectacle or a platform for the current government to project unity or authority. For instance, state funerals often involve elaborate ceremonies that emphasize national pride and continuity, which the family might believe would overshadow Lungu's individual legacy or downplay his contributions as a PF leader. Furthermore, the family may suspect that the government's involvement could be used to control the narrative around Lungu's death, potentially sanitizing or reshaping his political legacy to suit the UPND's agenda. Practical and logistical concerns. Logistically, the family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa, where he died, may reflect practical considerations. Organizing a state funeral in Zambia would require transporting his remains back to the country, a process that involves bureaucratic hurdles, costs, and coordination with state authorities. The family's preference to handle arrangements in South Africa, as indicated by their initial plans for a burial in Johannesburg, suggests they sought a streamlined process free from government oversight. Additionally, Lungu's presence in South Africa at the time of his death, possibly for medical treatment or personal reasons, may have influenced the family's decision to keep the burial there. South Africa has a significant Zambian diaspora, and the family may have felt that a burial in Johannesburg would allow them to honor Lungu in a setting where he had connections or support. Cultural and symbolic dimensions. In Zambian culture, burial decisions often carry symbolic weight. The choice of burial location can reflect a person's identity, status, or legacy. The Lungu family's resistance may be tied to their belief that a South African burial aligns with Lungu's personal or political identity, perhaps reflecting his international stature or connections forged during his presidency. Conversely, they may view a state-mandated burial in Zambia as an attempt to nationalize Lungu's legacy, potentially erasing aspects of his identity that the family holds dear. The family's legal actions, including filing an injunction in South Africa to halt a state-led repatriation, underscore their determination to assert control. This legal maneuver suggests a calculated effort to protect their autonomy, even at the cost of escalating tensions with the government. Perceived government overreach. The Lungu family's resistance is also likely fueled by a perception of government overreach. Posts on X indicate that the family felt sidelined by the government's insistence on taking over funeral arrangements from South Africa. The family's refusal to engage with Hichilema's administration, as noted by the president himself, suggests a breakdown in communication and trust. This standoff may reflect the family's belief that the government is using Lungu's death to assert dominance or settle political scores, rather than genuinely honoring his memory. In summary, the Lungu family's resistance is a multifaceted response driven driven by emotional grief, cultural values, political mistrust, and practical considerations. Their actions reflect a desire to protect their agency and ensure that Lungu's burial reflects his personal and political legacy as they envision it, rather than as dictated by a government they view with suspicion. 2. What the government is demanding. The Zambian government, under President Hakainde Hichilema, has taken a firm stance on the need to repatriate Edgar Lungu's remains and oversee his burial in Zambia. This position is rooted in legal, political, and cultural arguments, but it has also sparked significant controversy. Below, I outline the government's demands and the rationale behind them. Demand for repatriation and state funeral. The government's primary demand is to repatriate Lungu's body to Zambia and conduct a state funeral. According to posts on X, the Zambian state insists that Lungu, as a former president, should be buried in Zambia to honor his contributions to the nation. This demand is grounded in the precedent that former heads of state are typically accorded state funerals, which are seen as a matter of national pride and unity. A state funeral in Zambia would likely involve a series of official ceremonies, including lying in state, a public procession, and burial at a designated site, such as the Leopard's Hill Memorial Park, where other Zambian presidents have been laid to rest. The government argues that this is a fitting tribute to Lungu's legacy as a national leader, regardless of political differences. Legal actions to enforce repatriation. To enforce its demands, the government has pursued legal action in South Africa, where Lungu's body was located at the time of the dispute. Posts on X indicate that the Zambian government filed a court application to stop the Lungu family's planned burial in Johannesburg, arguing that Lungu's status as a former president necessitates a burial in Zambia. The Gauteng High Court in Pretoria issued a ruling halting the burial pending a final determination on repatriation, suggesting that the government's legal arguments carried weight. The government's legal strategy appears to hinge on the principle that a former president's burial is a matter of national interest, superseding family preferences. This argument may draw on Zambian constitutional provisions or customary practices regarding the treatment of former heads of state, though specific legal citations are not detailed in the available information. Political and symbolic motivation. The government's insistence on a state funeral is not merely logistical, but deeply political. A state funeral allows the current administration to project an image of unity and respect for Zambia's history, even for a political rival like Lungu. By overseeing the funeral, the government can control the narrative, emphasizing national reconciliation and continuity over partisan divides. This is particularly significant given the tense political climate between the UPND and PF since the 2021 election. Moreover, repatriating Lungu's body and conducting a state funeral reinforces the government's authority and legitimacy. Allowing a former president to be buried abroad could be perceived as a failure of state sovereignty or a tacit acknowledgement that Lungu's legacy is detached from Zambia. The government likely sees this as a precedent-setting issue, where conceding to the family's wishes could weaken its ability to assert control over similar matters in the future. Cultural and historical precedents. Culturally, the government's demand aligns with Zambian traditions that emphasize burying prominent figures in their homeland. In many African societies, the burial of a leader in their country of origin is seen as a way to honor their contributions and maintain a connection with their people. The government may argue that Lungu's burial in Zambia is a matter of national pride, ensuring that his legacy remains tied to the nation he led. Historically, Zambia has a tradition of state funerals for former presidents, such as Kenneth Kaunda and Rupia Banda, which were conducted with significant government involvement. The Hichilema administration likely views Lungu's case as no different, arguing that a state funeral is a non-negotiable obligation to honor a former head of state. Attempts at engagement. President Hichilema has publicly stated that his government attempted to engage with the Lungu family to resolve the dispute amicably. According to a post on X, Hichilema claimed that the family refused to communicate with his administration following Lungu's death. This suggests that the government's legal actions were a last resort after failed negotiations, though the family's perspective on these attempts remains unclear. The government's demands, while rooted in legal and cultural arguments, have been criticized as heavy-handed by some observers. The decision to pursue legal action in a foreign court rather than resolving the matter through dialogue has fueled perceptions of overreach and insensitivity to the family's grief. In summary, the Zambian government demands the repatriation of Lungu's remains and a state-led funeral, arguing that this is a matter of national interest, cultural tradition, and historical precedent. Its legal actions in South Africa and public statements reflect a determination to assert state authority, even at the risk of escalating tensions with the Lungu family and their supporters. 3. The deeper political and emotional stakes. The dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial is not just a logistical or legal issue, but a deeply political and emotional one, with implications for Zambia's national identity, political stability, and social cohesion. Below, I explore the broader stakes involved. Political stakes. The feud between the Lungu family and the Hichilema government is a microcosm of Zambia's broader political divisions. Lungu's presidency was marked by controversies, including allegations of electoral irregularities, economic mismanagement, and suppression of dissent. His defeat in 2021 to Hichilema was a significant moment for Zambia, signaling a shift from PF to UPND rule. However, tensions between the two parties have persisted persisted, with PF supporters alleging persecution by the UPND government. The burial dispute has become a flashpoint for these tensions. For the government, controlling the funeral is an opportunity to demonstrate magnanimity and national leadership, potentially defusing accusations of partisanship. However, the Lungu family and PF supporters may see this as an attempt to co-opt Lungu's legacy or marginalize their political base. The government's legal actions in South Africa, as reported on X, have been portrayed by some as an overreach of power, further inflaming political divisions. The outcome of this dispute could have long-term political consequences. If the government prevails, it may strengthen its authority but risk alienating PF supporters, who constitute a significant portion of the population. Conversely, if the Lungu family succeeds in burying Lungu in South Africa, it could embolden opposition forces and be seen as a symbolic victory against the UPND's dominance. Emotional stakes. On an emotional level, the dispute is a deeply human tragedy. For the Lungu family, the loss of Edgar Lungu is a personal grief compounded by public scrutiny and political pressure. Their resistance to state involvement reflects a desire to mourn privately and honor Lungu's memory in a way that feels authentic to them. The government's insistence on a state funeral, while framed as a national duty, may feel like an intrusion into this private process, exacerbating the family's pain. For Zambians, Lungu's death is a moment of collective mourning, but it is also divisive. Supporters of the PF view Lungu as a champion of the common people, while critics associate his presidency with economic challenges and democratic backsliding. The burial dispute has amplified these divisions, with some Zambians seeing the government's actions as respectful and others viewing them as disrespectful to the family's wishes. National identity and legacy. The dispute also raises questions about national identity and how Zambia honors its leaders. A state funeral in Zambia would reinforce the idea that former presidents, regardless of their political affiliations, are national figures whose legacies belong to the country. However, the Lungu family's preference for a South African burial challenges this notion, suggesting that a leader's legacy can transcend national boundaries or be defined by personal and familial choices. This tension reflects broader questions about Zambia's post-colonial identity. As a relatively young nation, Zambia is still navigating how to balance individual, familial, and state interests in matters of national significance. The Lungu case could set a precedent for how future leaders are memorialized, shaping the country's cultural and political norms. Regional implications. The involvement of South African courts adds a regional dimension to the dispute. South Africa, as a regional powerhouse, is home to a significant Zambian diaspora, and its legal system has become a battleground for this conflict. The Gauteng High Court's decision to halt the burial pending further deliberation highlights the complexity of cross-border legal issues and the potential for diplomatic tensions between Zambia and South Africa. The dispute also resonates with broader African debates about state authority versus individual rights. Across the continent, governments often assert control over the funerals of prominent figures to project unity or legitimacy, but these efforts can clash with family wishes or cultural norms. The Lungu case may influence how other African nations handle similar disputes in the future. In summary, the political and emotional stakes of the Lungu burial dispute are profound, touching on issues of power, grief, national identity, and regional dynamics. The outcome will likely shape Zambia's political landscape and public sentiment for years to come. 4. What Zambians in South Africa and back home are saying. Public sentiment in Zambia and among the Zambian diaspora in South Africa is deeply divided, reflecting the polarized nature of the burial dispute. Social media platforms, particularly X, provide a window into these reactions, so they must be treated as inconclusive and reflective of individual perspectives rather than definitive public opinion. Below, I analyze the sentiments expressed by Zambians in both contexts. Zambians in South Africa. The Zambian diaspora in South Africa, particularly in Johannesburg, has been vocal about the dispute given its proximity to the planned burial site. Some members of the diaspora support the Lungu family's decision to bury the former president in South Africa, seeing it as a practical choice given his presence there at the time of his death. They may also view it as a way to honor Lungu's connections to the diaspora, as many Zambians in South Africa supported his presidency and the PF's policies. However, others in the diaspora align with the government's position, arguing that a former president should be buried in Zambia to maintain national pride. This group may see the family's resistance as disrespectful to Zambian traditions or an attempt to politicize Lungu's death. The court ruling halting the burial in Johannesburg has been a point of contention, with some diaspora members expressing frustration at the delay and others supporting the legal process as a means of resolving the dispute fairly. Zambians in Zambia. In Zambia, public opinion is equally polarized. Supporters of the PF Lungu's party largely back the family's stance, viewing the government's actions as an attempt to control and diminish Lungu's legacy. Posts on X suggest that some Zambians see the government's legal actions as an overreach, accusing Hichilema of using Lungu's death to assert dominance over the opposition. Conversely, UPND supporters and those critical of Lungu's presidency argue that a state funeral in Zambia is the appropriate course of action. They emphasize the importance of honoring a former president in a manner that reflects national unity and pride. Some have expressed sympathy for the family's grief, disagree, but believe that the government's position is justified given Lungu's status as a national figure. Broader themes in public discourse. Across both contexts, several themes emerge in public reactions. Grief and respect. Many Zambians, regardless of political affiliation, express a desire for Lungu's memory to be honored respectfully. The dispute's public nature has led to calls for sensitivity and dialogue to avoid further division. Political polarization. The burial issue has become a proxy for broader political tensions, with PF and UPND supporters using it to reinforce their narratives about governance and legitimacy. Cultural values. Debates about the appropriate burial location reflect differing interpretations of Zambian cultural norms, with some emphasizing the family's right to decide and others prioritizing national traditions. Diaspora-state relations. For Zambians in South Africa, the dispute highlights their complex relationship with the homeland as they navigate their identity as both Zambians and residents of another country. In summary, public sentiment in Zambia and South Africa is deeply divided, reflecting the broader political and cultural fault lines exposed by the burial dispute. These reactions underscore the challenge of balancing personal, familial, and national interests in a highly charged context. 5. Government versus Lungu family. The feud begins. The feud between the Lungu family and the Zambian government began shortly after Edgar Lungu's death, as competing visions for his burial emerged. According to posts on X, the family initially planned to bury Lungu in Johannesburg, where he passed away, while the government insisted on repatriating his body to Zambia for a state funeral. This disagreement quickly escalated into a legal and public confrontation, setting the stage for a broader conflict. Timeline of the feud. Lungu's death. The exact date and cause of Lungu's death are not specified in the available information, but it occurred in South Africa, prompting immediate discussions about funeral arrangements. Initial standoff. The Lungu family expressed a desire to handle the funeral arrangements themselves, starting in South Africa, while the government sought to take over from the outset. Failed negotiations. President Hichilema claimed that the family refused to engage with his administration, leading to a breakdown in communication. Legal action. The government filed a court application in South Africa to stop the planned burial in Johannesburg, while the Lungu family, including former First Lady Esther Lungu and their children, responded with an injunction to maintain control. Court ruling. On June 25, 2025, the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria halted the burial, pending a final decision on repatriation, marking a temporary victory for the government. Key players. The Lungu family, led by Esther Lungu and supported by their children and lawyer Makibi Zulu, the family has been steadfast in their resistance to state involvement. The Zambian government. President Hichilema and his administration have driven the push for repatriation, framing it as a matter of national interest. South African courts. The Gauteng High Court has become a neutral arbiter tasked with resolving the legal dispute. The feud's origins lie in a fundamental disagreement over who has the right to control Lungu's burial, with both sides invoking cultural, legal, and political arguments to justify their position. 6. Background. Why burial became a legal issue. The transformation of Lungu's burial into a legal issue reflects a confluence of cultural, political, and legal factors. Below, I explore the background that led to this unprecedented situation. Cultural context. In Zambia, the burial of a prominent figure like a former president is typically a communal affair, with the state playing a significant role. However, family preferences also carry weight, particularly in matters of personal significance. The Lungu family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa challenged this norm, prompting the government to assert its authority. Political context. The political rivalry between the PF and UPND has shaped the dispute. Lungu's presidency was divisive, and his death has reignited debates about his legacy. The government's insistence on a state funeral may be seen as an attempt to control this narrative, while the family's resistance reflects their distrust of the UPND's intentions. Legal context. The involvement of South African courts is a unique aspect of this case. Because Lungu died in South Africa, the family sought to conduct the burial there, invoking their legal rights as private citizens. The government, however, argued that Lungu's status as a former president makes his burial a matter of Zambian national interest, leading to a legal showdown in a foreign jurisdiction. This background highlights the complexity of the dispute, which is not just about burial logistics, but about power, identity, and legacy in a politically charged environment. 7. Inside the courtroom. What was said. While specific details of the courtroom proceedings are not fully available, posts on X provide some insight into the arguments presented. Below, I reconstruct the likely arguments based on this information and the broader context. The government's case. The Zambian government likely argued that Lungu's status as a former president makes his burial a matter of national significance, requiring a state funeral in Zambia. Precedents from other Zambian presidents support repatriation and state involvement. A burial in South Africa would undermine national pride and set a problematic precedent. The Lungu family's case. The family, represented by lawyer Makibi Zulu, likely countered that, as private citizens, they have the right to determine Lungu's burial arrangements. Lungu's presence in South Africa at the time of his death justifies a burial there. The government's actions constitute an overreach and disrespect for their grief. Court ruling. The Gauteng High Court's decision to halt the burial suggests that it found merit in the government's argument, at least temporarily, but sought to avoid a hasty resolution. The ruling reflects the court's role as a neutral arbiter in a complex cross-border dispute. 8. Lungu families' demands explained. The Lungu families' demands center on their desire to control the funeral arrangements, particularly the decision to bury Lungu in South Africa. These demands are rooted in autonomy. The family seeks to honor Lungu's memory in a way that aligns with their values and his wishes. Mistrust. Their refusal to engage with the government reflects a lack of trust in Hichilema's administration. Practicality. A South African burial may be logistically simpler and align with Lungu's connections to the diaspora. Their legal actions, including the injunction filed in South Africa, underscore their commitment to these demands. 9. Government's legal argument. The government's legal argument emphasizes Lungu's status as a former president and the national interest in conducting a state funeral. Key points include national precedent, the tradition of state funerals for former presidents. Sovereignty, the importance of burying a national leader in Zambia to maintain state authority. Legal jurisdiction, the government's right to intervene in matters involving a former head of state, even abroad. These arguments were persuasive enough to secure a temporary court ruling in their favor. 10. Public reaction in Zambia and South Africa. As discussed earlier, public reaction is polarized, with PF supporters backing the family and UPND supporters aligning with the government. The diaspora in South Africa is similarly divided, with some supporting a local burial and others favoring repatriation. Social media reflects these tensions, with calls for dialogue and respect amid the political rhetoric. 11. Final thoughts. A nation divided. The dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial has exposed deep divisions in Zambian society, reflecting political, cultural, and emotional fault lines. The outcome will likely shape how Zambia navigates similar issues in the future, balancing state authority with individual rights. While the legal battle continues, the need for dialogue and reconciliation is clear to avoid further polarizing a grieving nation.